Hello again, my name's Donald, Engagement Coordinator of Black Male Barbers Mental Health Project. Really pleased to have you here today for our second podcast. Our podcast is all about supporting black men in the city around their mental health. Well, I say their mental health, I'm talking about my mental health, your mental health, the mental health of your brother, your father, your son. We're here to help one another, and that's what we want from this podcast. Hopefully you got something from last week's podcast, hoping that this week you'll get something similar. And I wanted to really this week to focus very much on what I think I've learned to date in my post as engagement coordinator. And I think the first thing I've learned is there's a lot of barbers in the city of Sheffield. I came to Sheffield about 30 odd years ago, and back then, you know, when you were looking for a barber, you had about 3 or 4 barbers, black barbers you could look for and find. Today, I think I've sort of identified around 18 black barbers, and they represent the entire spread of the African continent. We're talking there about barbers who are from Ghana, barbers from Nigeria, barbers from Eritrea, barbers from Ethiopia, barbers from North Africa, and, you know, barbers from the Caribbean or their parents come from the Caribbean. So it's a very, very exciting mix of barbers, and they all, in their own way, reflect the communities from which they come from. And I think that's a really important thing about the barbers. They have always been historically, geographically, such an important feature of the African community. Wherever the African community is, the barber is an important part of that. And it's a place where, as I said last week, a place where people feel as if they can be safe to have those conversations which they may not feel able to have elsewhere. And one of the conversations which we want to really continue and build is that conversation around mental health. We may not use that title all the time, but the idea of looking after oneself. We think about it with regard to physical health. I think we should be thinking about it similarly around mental health. And I would say this is something which has been developing for the past 30 odd years. I was talking with Errol earlier that 30 odd years ago, when I first came to Sheffield, SACMA was just being established. And I think it was, you know, a really, really sort of like step forward when SACMA had as its name Sheffield African Caribbean Mental Health Association, because back in the day people didn't talk about mental health. People didn't talk about it within their families, they didn't talk about it within the community, and they didn't talk about it really in broader society. So there's been a massive change in the way in which people view mental health and their preparedness to talk about it. And I'm minded of a funeral I went to, is actually of a relative there, and my cousin actually said, you know, we have to talk about mental health, and it's something which we feel more able to do at the moment, and long may it continue. So, what other things have I learnt about in the course of my job? Well, I thought I knew the statistics or the issues around black men's mental health. I knew there was a lot to be concerned about, but I didn't realise the extent to which the problems were far greater than I'd ever thought there were. I mean, I said last week about we're 5 times more likely, black men are, to be detained under the Mental Health Act than white men. We're 10 to 12 times more likely to experience a mental health illness than white men. We're more likely to be referred or to experience police intervention in the process of being detained under the Mental Health Act. We're more likely to be placed in a secure unit if we are detained under the Mental Health Act. We're more likely to be physically restrained if we're detained under the Mental Health Act. We're more likely to be given drugs, heavy-duty drugs than alternative therapeutic support such as talking therapies. We're more likely not to report mental health illness or concerns to mental health practitioners or to a GP. All of these things are things which I knew something about, but I know more about now. And it could feel when I talk like this, it's quite dispiriting. And I don't think that is the case, because at the same time as that, I found out that there's lots of agencies and lots of groups up and down the country, black groups, which are addressing these issues and are continuing the struggle, which has always been there as long as we've been in this country, to actually address these issues of the disparities in the care which we receive from the police, from education, from health. And we need those groups. There's groups such as Black Minds Matter. There's the group I work for, SACMA. So it's very important that we continue to self-organise, we continue to actually come together as people to highlight these issues, to put pressure on the agencies and the organisations and authorities who should be providing a far better service for us. In the process of doing that, we find out more, we learn more, we educate ourselves, and in doing so, we're able to put more pressure on these particular organisations. We at SACMA are working with Sheffield Health and Social Care, and we've been working with Melissa Simmons, who is a race equality or equity officer there, and she's very much focused on addressing or getting the organisations or Sheffield Health and Social Care to really look at their practices, to ways in which things can be improved. And that's really one of the things we need to do. But if I focus here really about the conversation, let's focus on that there, because I think at that ground level, the conversation amongst ourselves as black men, because we have to basically say to ourselves that there is an issue. We see it. We know it's out there. We know of friends. We know of relatives. We know that life is difficult at times, and we know sometimes some people are struggling. And, when we've been able to step inside there and actually give that person that time to listen carefully to that person, to allow that person to feel safe in their vulnerability, with regard to say, I don't feel good, or to say, actually, I'm worried, or I'm struggling, or whatever it might be. It could be that friend whose relationship is broken down, that friend who's just had a promotion passed over, that friend who's got financial worries. That in those cases there, I'd like to feel that we as individuals, as black men, are therefore those black men who are our friends, those black friends, male friends who have been with us forever, that they feel as if they can talk to us and that we've got someone to talk to as well. And they'll actually sometimes say, actually, I don't feel good, or to sometimes even feel a bit weak, and not to feel in any way guilty or ashamed for feeling that way, because there's so much pressure on us to actually appear to be a type of man which we may not be, because all of us are very complex. Every individual is a unique person, and every person has their own particular experiences and ways of dealing with things which we need to respect and honour. And I think the more we're able to just actually have that conversation, then I think the better for all of us. And I hope that actually this podcast and other podcasts where we'll be inviting people who know much more about the subject matter than I do. We're very blessed in this city to have a number of psychotherapists, mental health practitioners, to have counsellors, to have lots of people working in so many different fields of expertise. And if we can get some of these people onto the podcast there, just to talk about some of the things they know around mental health, then that will help us to actually just build that conversation, to keep the conversation going, so that we can help to actually make mental health discussions just something which we do, and we don't have a stigma about it. Because if we don't have a stigma about it, or we reduce the stigma, it's much more likely that people feel more comfortable maybe to go to their GP, to somewhere else, say, actually, I'm struggling. So podcast number 2, looking forward to doing many more podcasts with you, maybe not with me in front of the camera, but with other people in front of the camera and giving their experience and expertise. So for now, bye, see you soon.